The boardroom doors slammed open with such force that the glass walls trembled, and for 3 seconds that stretched like hours, nobody breathed. It wasn't the entrance itself that paralyzed 20 of the city's most powerful executives. It was the man who stood in the doorway. Shoulders squared, eyes burning with the kind of quiet rage that doesn't need volume to terrify. He wore a maintenance uniform with grease still under his fingernails. Yet every person in that marble-floored sanctum felt suddenly, inexplicably small dot at the head of the table. Scarlett Martin, CEO of Horizon Technologies, went pale as the stranger's gaze locked onto hers. Behind him, security guards hesitated, hands hovering over radios, sensing something they couldn't name. This was the moment a janitor with calloused hands would shatter the facade of corporate power. And how 5 words, "Try touching her and see," would expose secrets worth millions and a past no one saw coming. If stories like this move you, stay with me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Sterling Heights corporate tower rose like a glass cathedral against the autumn sky. Its 47 floors housing some of the most influential tech companies in the nation. On the 32nd floor, the executive suite of Horizon Technologies gleamed with polished marble, leather chairs that cost more than most cars, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below. It was a kingdom of spreadsheets and shareholder meetings, where billion-dollar decisions were made over imported coffee and calculated smiles. Tonight, the atmosphere crackled with tension. The quarterly investor gala had transformed the executive conference room into something resembling a palace ballroom. Crystal stemware caught the light from minimalist chandeliers. Servers in crisp white shirts glided between clusters of men and women draped in designer suits and evening gowns. Conversations hummed with the particular frequency of wealth. Discussions of acquisitions and market shares wrapped in polite laughter. At the center of it all stood Scarlett Martin, 34 years old and the youngest CEO in Horizon Technologies history. She wore a midnight blue dress that spoke of power rather than seduction, her auburn hair pulled back in a style that said she had no time for frivolity. To the investors surrounding her, she was untouchable. A woman who had climbed from junior analyst to corner office in 8 years, through sheer brilliance and ruthless efficiency. But tonight, behind her practiced smile, Scarlett's mind raced with calculations that had nothing to do with profit margins. She could feel the eyes on her, the whispers that had started 3 days ago, when the first anonymous email hit the board's private server. Accusations, photographs, questions about her integrity that threatened to unravel everything she had built. Near the service entrance, almost invisible among the catering staff, worked Gavin Doyle. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to being overlooked, refilling water glasses, clearing empty plates. His broad shoulders hunched slightly as if trying to make his 6-foot frame smaller. His uniform was borrowed, 2 sizes too small across the chest, and his hands bore the permanent stains of engine oil that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase. To everyone in this room, he was nobody, just another pair of hands hired to make their evening run smoothly. But Gavin saw everything. Years of training had wired his brain to notice details others missed. He counted exits out of habit, marked the of security cameras, noted which guests drank too quickly and which ones watched Scarlett Martin with eyes that held more than professional interest. He had taken this catering gig as a favor to his neighbor, who ran a small staffing company, needing the extra cash to cover next month's rent and his daughter's upcoming birthday. His daughter, Sophie, 8 years old, with her mother's dark curls and a smile that could light up the darkest corners of his heart. She was home now with Mrs. Chun from downstairs, probably fighting bedtime, clutching the stuffed elephant he'd won for her at the county fair. Sophie was his anchor, his reason for getting up at 5 every morning to work at the automotive shop. His motivation to stay sober when the nightmares came. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Serve drinks. Stay invisible. Collect the paycheck. Go home. Then the atmosphere shifted. Gavin felt it before he saw it. That electric change in the air that used to precede ambushes. The conversations near the eastern wall dropped to whispers. Heads turned. A woman's laugh cut off mid-note, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that spread like ripples across water. 3 men had entered through the main doors. And everything about them screamed wrong. They wore suits. Expensive ones, but they wore them like armor rather than fashion. The lead man was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of face that appeared trustworthy in photographs, but held something cruel around the edges. Richard Blackwood. Gavin recognized him from the framed photographs in the hallway. Horizon's former coup, who had been quietly forced out 6 months ago, under circumstances the company never discussed publicly. Flanking him were 2 younger men, corporate lawyers by the look of them, carrying leather portfolios like weapons. Scarlett's spine straightened almost imperceptibly, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Gavin watched her face transform, the practiced smile becoming a mask carved from ice. Whatever history existed between her and Blackwood, it wasn't pleasant. Scarlett. Blackwood's voice carried across the room with the confidence of a man who knew he held the power. So wonderful to see you thriving. I hope you don't mind that I brought a few friends to your little celebration. The room had gone silent now, investors and board members exchanging glances that ranged from curious to alarmed. Security guards near the door shifted their weight, uncertain whether to intervene. Scarlett set down her glass with deliberate care. Richard, this is a private event. I'm sure you remember what private means, even if you've forgotten other professional courtesies. Her voice was steady, but Gavin caught the slight tremor in her fingers as she smoothed her dress. He found himself moving closer, instinctively positioning himself near the wall where he could see both the confrontation and the exits. Blackwood smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Oh, I remember quite a bit, Scarlett. In fact, that's why I'm here. You see, I've been doing some reflecting on my time at Horizon, and I've discovered some fascinating discrepancies in our financial records. Discrepancies that seem to trace back to your office. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just a social ambush, it was corporate warfare played out in front of witnesses. That's a serious accusation, one of the board members interjected, an older woman with steel-gray hair. Do you have evidence? Volumes of it, Blackwood replied smoothly. One of his lawyers stepped forward, opening a portfolio to reveal thick stacks of documents. Emails, transaction records, signed authorizations, all pointing to a pattern of embezzlement that would make for very uncomfortable reading if it reached, say, the Securities and Exchange Commission. Scarlett's face had gone pale, but her voice remained level. Those documents are fabricated. This is nothing more than a vindictive attempt to destroy my reputation, because I had the courage to expose your own corruption. My corruption? Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I was cleared of all charges, as you well know. But you, my dear, you've been very clever. Hiding behind your meteoric rise, your inspiring success story. The brilliant young woman who saved the company. Except you saved it by stealing from it. The room erupted in murmurs. Phones appeared in hands, undoubtedly already texting the scandal to contacts and media outlets. Scarlett stood alone at the head of the table, surrounded by people who moments ago had been toasting her success, now looking at her with suspicion and calculation. Gavin's jaw clenched. He didn't know this woman, had never spoken to her beyond a polite nod when he'd arrived for his shift. But he recognized the setup, the orchestrated destruction of someone's life for reasons that had nothing to do with justice. He'd seen it before, in different contexts, and it always left the same bitter taste. Blackwood moved closer to Scarlett, invading her space with the casual entitlement of a man who had never been told no. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign, effective immediately. You'll sign over your shares at a very reasonable price, my price, and you'll disappear quietly. Or these documents go public, and you'll spend the next decade fighting charges that will destroy not just your career, but your freedom. He reached out, his hand moving toward her shoulder in a gesture that masqueraded as paternal, but held unmistakable threat. Scarlett flinched back, but there was nowhere to go. The table behind her, Blackwood in front, his lawyers blocking any escape route. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's when Gavin moved. He didn't think about it, didn't weigh consequences or consider his position. He simply stepped forward, placing himself between Blackwood and Scarlett with the fluid efficiency of someone whose body remembered combat even when his mind tried to forget. "Sir," Gavin's voice was quiet, respectful even, but it carried a weight that made Blackwood pause mid-reach. "I'm going to have to ask you to step back. I'm going to have to ask you to step back." The room collectively held its breath. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, taking in the maintenance uniform, the calloused hands, the audacity of a nobody inserting himself into a conversation among titans. "And who the hell are you?" Gavin didn't answer. He simply stood his ground, his body language speaking the language Blackwood's primitive brain understood even if his ego refused to acknowledge it. This was a man who would not move, who would not be intimidated, who carried something far more dangerous than corporate portfolios. "Security." Blackwood barked. "Remove this man immediately." The guards started forward, but something in Gavin's eyes made them hesitate. It was the look of someone who had stood his ground against far worse than corporate security. Someone for whom this confrontation was barely a ripple compared to storms he'd weathered. Scarlett found her voice, steadier now. "No, he stays." Blackwood's face flushed red. "You're protecting the help now? How fitting. A thief hiding behind a janitor. Try touching her and see." Gavin said quietly. The words landed like a grenade in the hushed room. The silence that followed. Gavin's words stretched like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Nobody moved. The investors and board members stood frozen, champagne glasses suspended halfway to lips, eyes darting between the maintenance worker who had just issued a challenge and the former Q, whose face had gone from red to purple. Richard Blackwood took a step back, not from fear but from sheer disbelief. "Did you just threaten me?" "I stated a boundary," Gavin replied, his voice still maddeningly calm. "There's a difference." Security finally reached them. Two guards in black suits who looked uncertain about whether to grab the maintenance worker or wait for clearer instructions. The head of security, a former police officer named Torres, put a hand on Gavin's shoulder. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me." Gavin didn't resist. He simply turned to Scarlett, meeting her eyes for the first time that evening. In that brief moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended their vastly different worlds. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod, whether of thanks or dismissal. He couldn't tell. As the guards escorted him toward the service exit, Gavin heard Blackwood's voice rising again, pressing his advantage. "Well, that was entertaining. Now, as I was saying before we were interrupted by the hired help, you have until Monday morning to make your decision, Scarlett. Resign gracefully, or I release everything to the press." The door closed behind Gavin, muffling the continuing confrontation. Torres led him down the service corridor, past industrial kitchens and supply closets. The glamorous veneer of the corporate floor, giving way to the utilitarian reality beneath. "You want to tell me what that was about?" Torres asked, not unkindly. "Man was threatening her," Gavin said simply. "That man is Richard Blackwood, worth about $400 million. Sits on half a dozen boards. Has lawyers who eat people like you for breakfast. Don't care who he is. Wrong is wrong. Torres sighed, stopping at a small office near the loading dock. "Look, I'm going to need your information for the incident report. Name, address, who hired you." Gavin provided the details mechanically, his mind already elsewhere. He'd lost the catering gig, that was certain. Probably burned the bridge with his neighbor's staffing company, too. Another job gone, another black mark on a resume. Already full of gaps and short-term positions, the story of his life. Since he'd come back from 3 tours that had turned him from an idealistic kid who believed in service into a man who startled awake at car horns and couldn't stand in crowded rooms without mapping escape routes. Back to a country that thanked him for his service, but couldn't quite figure out what to do with men whose primary skills involved things nobody wanted to discuss at dinner parties. He'd tried. God knows he'd tried. College on the GI Bill, studying mechanical engineering. Making it through 2 semesters before the nightmares got so bad. He couldn't focus on thermodynamics when his brain was still processing the physics of explosion patterns. Construction work, warehouse jobs. Finally landing at Morrison's Auto Repair, where the owner, an old Vietnam vet, didn't ask too many questions about the gaps in his employment, or the days when Gavin's hands shook too badly to hold a wrench. Then Sophie's mother had left, just like that. One morning he'd woken to find Amanda gone, her closet empty. A note on the kitchen table explaining that she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't watch him break himself trying to be normal. Couldn't raise their daughter in a home where Daddy sometimes confused the backfire of a truck with incoming mortar. She'd left Sophie. That was the part Gavin still couldn't process. Whatever his faults, whatever his failures, Amanda had walked away from their 7-year-old daughter without a backward glance. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. Amanda signing over full custody without a fight. Disappearing to somewhere out west where she could apparently breathe again. So it had been just Gavin and Sophie for the past year. Learning to braid hair through YouTube videos. Figuring out the politics of 2nd-grade birthday parties. Sitting through parent-teacher conferences where Mrs. Patterson praised Sophie's creativity, but gently suggested that maybe counseling might help with the little girl's anxiety about her father leaving her too. "I'm not going anywhere," he'd promised Sophie every night, tucking her into the small bed in their smaller apartment in the Brookfield district, where sirens wailed at all hours and the elevator had been broken for 3 months. "I'm here. Always here." Torres finished his paperwork, handing Gavin a copy. "You're not getting paid for tonight, you know. And I doubt anyone's calling you back for work at Sterling Heights. Figured as much. Can I ask you something, off the record?" Torres leaned back in his chair. "Why'd you do it?" "That woman, CEO Martin, she's got an army of lawyers and security. She didn't need some maintenance guy playing hero." Gavin was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something he barely understood himself. "Had a commander once," he finally said. "Used to tell us that the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when he thinks nobody's looking, when there's no reward, no recognition. Just the choice between right and wrong." Sounds like a good commander. He was. Died saving his squad. Torres nodded slowly, the understanding of one who'd served passing between them without need for further words. "Go on, get out of here. Use the service elevator, avoid the main lobby." Blackwood's the type to press charges just because he can. Gavin took the service elevator down, emerging into the loading dock area where delivery trucks arrived in the pre-dawn hours. The city stretched out before him, lights twinkling in the October darkness. Each one representing lives he'd never touch, problems he'd never solve. A world that existed entirely separate from his own small corner of struggle and survival. His phone. "Buzz, Mrs. Chun. Sophie's asking for you. Says she can't sleep. I told her you'd call." He dialed immediately. Sophie's voice came through, small and worried. "Daddy, are you okay?" I'm fine, sweetheart. Just finished work. You should be asleep. I had a bad dream. You were far away and I couldn't find you. Gavin's chest tightened. I'm never far away. I'm coming home right now, okay? 20 minutes, and I'll be there to check under the bed for monsters. There's no monsters under my bed, Daddy. I'm 8, not a baby. My mistake. What about in the closet? She giggled, the sound like sunlight breaking through clouds. You're silly. That's why you keep me around. Now go get in bed. Brush your teeth, and I'll be there before you know it. After hanging up, Gavin started the long walk to the bus stop. He'd sold his car 6 months ago when the transmission died and the repair cost more than the vehicle's value. Public transportation was unreliable but free with the Veterans Transit Pass. One of the few benefits he actually used. The bus was nearly empty at this hour. Just him and a few night shift workers heading home or to overnight jobs. Gavin took a seat near the back, watching the city slide past the grimy windows. The Sterling Heights district gave way to the Marshall business sector. Then the older residential neighborhoods of Brookfield. Where the buildings got shorter and the streets got darker, he thought about Scarlett Martin, wondering if she was still fighting her battle in that glass tower, or if Blackwood's threats had already won. He thought about her face when Blackwood had reached for her, that flash of genuine fear beneath the executive armor. Whatever she'd done or hadn't done, whatever financial irregularities existed in those documents, in that moment she'd been human, vulnerable. Alone. The bus lurched to a stop at Brookfield and 3rd. Gavin walked the remaining 4 blocks to his apartment building. A 6-story brick structure that had been luxury living sometime in the 1970s, but now housed mostly single parents, elderly pensioners, and people like him who were just trying to keep their heads above water. Mrs. Chen opened her door as he climbed to the 3rd floor. She was 76. A retired seamstress who watched Sophie most evenings in exchange for help with grocery shopping and the occasional repair work Gavin could manage. She finally fell asleep about 10 minutes ago. Mrs. Chun whispered in her accented English, "But she was very worried about you. I'm sorry. The job ran longer than expected. You look tired, Gavin, like you carry the world." He managed a smile. "Just carrying what's mine to carry. Just carrying what's mine to carry." Inside his apartment, Sophie was indeed asleep, her dark curls spread across the pillow, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant. Gavin stood in the doorway of her small room, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, feeling the familiar ache of fierce love mixed with desperate fear that he wasn't enough, would never be enough, couldn't protect her from a world that seemed determined to grind them both down. On his small kitchen table sat the bills, rent due in 12 days, electricity notice warning of disconnection, Sophie's school requesting payment for the fall field trip. Next to them, his phone buzzed with a text from Morrison at the auto shop. "Need you to open tomorrow." Jerry called in sick. 6 a.m. Gavin glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. 6 hours until he needed to be at work. 6 hours to sleep, wake up, get Sophie ready for school, drop her at Mrs. Chun's for the morning bus, and make it across town to the shop. He didn't allow himself to think about the catering paycheck he'd just lost, or what would happen if Morrison found out about tonight's incident and decided Gavin was more trouble than he was worth. He'd learned long ago that survival meant focusing on the next task, the next breath, the next moment. Planning too far ahead led to paralysis, to the darkness that waited in the corners of his mind. But as he finally lay down on the worn couch that served as his bed, giving Sophie the apartment's only bedroom, Gavin couldn't stop seeing Scarlett Martin's face. Couldn't stop wondering what would happen when Monday morning arrived and she had to make her impossible choice. Couldn't stop hearing his own voice echoing in that glass palace. Try touching her and see. Words he couldn't take back. Words that had probably cost him more than he could afford to lose. Words that felt right anyway, in a world where so little did anymore. The story broke at 6:43 a.m. Just as Gavin was unlocking the gate at Morrison's auto repair, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Horizon Technologies CEO faces embezzlement allegations. Dramatic confrontation at investor gala. Below the headline was a photograph, slightly blurry but unmistakable, showing Gavin standing between Scarlett Martin and Richard Blackwood. His body language protective, Blackwood's face twisted in outrage. Someone had been recording. Of course someone had been recording. In a room full of investors and board members. At least a dozen phones had probably captured the moment. And now it was spreading across social media like wildfire. By the time Morrison arrived at 7:30, Gavin's phone had accumulated 43 notifications. Text messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Friend requests on social media platforms he rarely used. And 3 voicemails from people claiming to be journalists. "You gonna tell me what's going on?" Morrison asked, nodding at the phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. He was 68, built like a fire hydrant, with hands permanently stained by decades of engine work and eyes that had seen enough of the world's ugliness to not be surprised by much anymore. Gavin handed him the phone with the news article pulled up. Morrison read in silence, his weathered face unreadable. "That you in the picture?" "Yes, sir. This happened at the catering job last night." "Yes, sir." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the photograph, then studying Gavin. "You know who Richard Blackwood is? What he's worth? The kind of lawyers he keeps on retainer?" "Found out last night." "And you got between him and this CEO woman anyway?" It wasn't a question, but Gavin answered. He was threatening her. Physically threatening her in front of a room full of people who were all too scared or too invested to do anything about it. Morrison handed back the phone. "You're an idiot." "Yes, sir, probably. An idiot with a daughter to feed and rent to pay. I'm aware." "Good." Morrison turned toward the shop. "Because I'm not firing you over this. But if reporters start showing up here bothering my customers, we're going to have a problem. Understand?" Relief flooded through Gavin. "Understood." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just get that transmission out of the Honda by noon. Customers picking it up at 1. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of socket wrenches and oil changes, but Gavin's phone continued its relentless buzzing. During his break, he finally listened to one of the voicemails. "Mr. Doyle, this is Amanda Reeves from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story on the confrontation at Horizon Technologies and we'd love to get your perspective. The public is very interested in the mysterious maintenance worker who stood up to Richard Blackwood. Please call me back at..." He deleted it without listening to the rest. Then deleted the other messages without listening at all. At noon, while he was washing grease from his hands, Morrison called him into the small office that smelled of coffee and motor oil. "You've got a visitor. Says it's important." Gavin dried his hands, expecting maybe another journalist who'd tracked him down. Instead, he found a woman in expensive charcoal suit standing in the shop's waiting area, looking distinctly out of place among the worn chairs and outdated magazines. She was perhaps 45, with sharp features and sharper eyes. "Mr. Doyle? I'm Victoria Nash, General Counsel for Horizon Technologies. I need a few minutes of your time." Morrison raised an eyebrow but disappeared back into the garage, giving them privacy. "I didn't do anything illegal," Gavin said immediately. "I know. I'm not here about legal action against you." Victoria gestured to the chairs. "May we sit?" They sat, Victoria perching on the edge of the seat as if afraid of what might be on the upholstery. "I'm here about Scarlett Martin. About what happened last night. Is she okay?" Something flickered across Victoria's face. Might have been approval. "That's your first question. Not whether you're in trouble, not how this affects you. Whether she's okay. Is she?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "No, the story Blackwood planted is everywhere. By this afternoon, there will be calls for her resignation from major shareholders. The board is meeting in emergency session, and the evidence he's produced, fabricated as it might be, is compelling enough to trigger a formal investigation. So he wins. Unless we can prove the documents are forgeries. Unless we can show that Blackwood has a vendetta and the resources to manufacture evidence. Unless, Victoria paused. Unless we can change the narrative. Gavin felt the trap closing even before she continued. Your news now, Mr. Doyle, the veteran maintenance worker who stood up to a billionaire bully. Social media is already making you into a folk hero. Try Touching Her and See is trending on 3 platforms. That's cultural power, and right now, Scarlett needs all the power she can get. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd be willing to make a statement. On camera, through our public relations team. Talk about what you saw last night, why you intervened. Give a character testimony about Scarlett's behavior during the confrontation. I don't know her character. I'd never met her before last night. But you read a situation. You assessed a threat. You have military training, don't you? You recognized predatory behavior when you saw it. Gavin's jaw tightened. You've been digging into my background. It's my job to know who we're dealing with. 3 tours, honorable discharge, decorated for valor. You're exactly the kind of witness who carries credibility. I'm exactly the kind of witness Blackwood's lawyers will tear apart. They'll find every gap in my employment history, every time I've struggled, every reason to paint me as unstable or desperate for attention. Victoria didn't deny it. Probably. But they'll do it in public, which means people will hear your story. Why you struggle to find stable work despite your service. Why veterans like you fall through the cracks. That's a narrative that resonates, Mr. Doyle. That's something people care about. You want to use my life as a sob story to deflect from your CEO's problems. I want to use the truth to fight lies. Yes, it benefits Scarlett. But it might also benefit you, veterans like you. Shine a light on issues that usually stay in the shadows. Gavin stood. I appreciate you coming here, Ms. Nash, but I'm not interested in being anyone's story. I intervened last night because it was the right thing to do. That's all. I don't want attention, don't want cameras, don't want my daughter seeing her father's face plastered across the news. Victoria stood as well, pulling a business card from her suit pocket. In case you change your mind. The offer stands. After she left, Gavin returned to the garage where Morrison was supposedly focused on an engine, but had obviously been listening. Smart woman, Morrison commented. Everything she said was true. You could help that CEO, maybe help yourself in the process. Don't want help. Just want to work, take care of Sophie, live quiet. Quiet's not always an option when the world decides to be loud at you. By the time Gavin picked Sophie up from after-school care at 4:30, the story had grown into a full media circus. The school's director pulled him aside, her expression sympathetic but firm. Mr. Doyle, we've had 3 reporters call today asking about you and Sophie. Obviously we haven't provided any information, but I wanted you to be aware. You might want to talk to Sophie, prepare her in case other students' parents have seen the news. In the car, an ancient Ford that coughed more than it ran, Sophie chattered about her day, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them. Gavin listened with half his attention, the other half watching the rearview mirror, old instincts on high alert for anyone following them. On high alert for anyone following them. At home, Mrs. Chun met them at the door with unusual urgency. Gavin, people have been coming. Knocking, asking questions. I told them nothing, but they're persistent. What kind of people? Reporters. One man said he was from a magazine. Another woman, very pushy, wanted to know about Sophie's mother. Rage flared hot in Gavin's chest. They asked about Amanda. I told her to leave or I would call police. But Gavin, I think maybe you should talk to someone official. This is not stopping on its own. That evening, after Sophie was in bed, Gavin sat at his kitchen table with Victoria Nash's business card and his phone. The news cycle had only intensified. More photographs had surfaced from the gala, multiple angles of the confrontation. Amateur video showed the moment Blackwood reached for Scarlett, Gavin stepping between them. The words that had become a viral sensation. "Try touching her and see." The comment sections were predictably divided. Half praised him as a hero, a working-class warrior standing up to corporate corruption. The other half questioned his motives, suggested he was an opportunist looking for his 15 minutes. Speculated about whether Scarlett had somehow orchestrated the entire thing for sympathy. And buried in the chaos, new details were emerging about Richard Blackwood's departure from Horizon Technologies. Whispers about harassment complaints that had been quietly settled. Questions about his own financial dealings that had never been fully investigated. The media smelled blood, and they were circling both Scarlett and Blackwood with equal enthusiasm. Gavin's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Doyle?" The voice was female, cultured, tired. "This is Scarlett Martin. I got your number from Victoria. I hope that's all right." He sat up straighter, as if she could somehow see him through the phone. "Ms. Martin, I wanted to call personally to thank you. What you did last night," her voice caught slightly. "No one has done something like that for me in a very long time. Maybe ever. You don't need to thank me. I do, though. And I also need to apologize. Victoria told me she approached you about making a statement. I didn't authorize that. I didn't want you dragged into this mess. Little late for that. It's already a mess. I know. I'm sorry. Blackwood is vicious, and now that you're part of the story, he won't hesitate to come after you too. His people are probably already digging into your background, looking for anything they can use. Let them dig. I've got nothing to hide. Everyone has something, Mr. Doyle, and men like Blackwood are experts at turning ordinary struggles into weapons." They were both quiet for a moment. In the background on her end, Gavin could hear voices, urgent conversations, the machinery of crisis management grinding away. "Can I ask you something?" Scarlett said finally. "Why did you do it? You didn't know me. You had no stake in this. You could have just walked away." Gavin thought about his answer, about the commander who'd taught him about choices when no one was watching. About Sophie sleeping in the next room, and the kind of man he wanted to be for her even when he fell short in so many other ways. "Because walking away is easy," he said. "And I'm tired of easy. Tired of watching people with power abuse it while everyone else pretends not to see. Maybe I couldn't do anything about it before, but last night, I could. So I did." Another silence, longer this time. When Scarlett spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "The board meets Monday morning. They're going to ask for my resignation. Blackwood's evidence is too detailed, too convincing, even though I know it's fabricated. Without proof of his manipulation, without something to counter his narrative, I'm going to lose everything I've built. I'm sorry. Don't be. I knew the risks when I pushed him out. I knew he'd come back for revenge. I just thought I'd have more time to prepare." She took a shaky breath. "Anyway, I wanted you to know that whatever happens, I'm grateful. You reminded me that there are still people who do the right thing simply because it's right. That's rarer than you might think." After they hung up, Gavin sat in the dark of his small kitchen, listening to the sounds of the building, sirens in the distance, Mrs. Chung's television through the thin walls, the hum of the refrigerator that needed replacing. He thought about Monday morning, about a woman who would walk into a boardroom and fight a battle she was likely to lose, about a billionaire who was willing to destroy someone's life out of spite, about a system that protected men like Blackwood while people like Scarlett, for all her success and power, were still vulnerable to those who played by different rules, and he thought about his own choices. He could stay quiet, let the news cycle move on, protect Sophie from the attention. Or he could do what Victoria Nash had asked, step into the spotlight. Risk the exposure and judgment, but maybe, possibly, help someone who needed it. The right thing when no one was watching. Except, now everyone was watching. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Gavin had spent the weekend fielding calls he didn't answer, deleting messages from reporters, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Sophie. She'd asked only once why people kept knocking on their door, and he'd told her it was a misunderstanding that would blow over soon. He wasn't sure he believed that himself. At Morrison's auto repair, the usual Monday morning rush felt subdued. Customers who normally chatted while waiting for oil changes now glanced at him with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, as if his sudden notoriety had made him a different person overnight. Morrison said nothing, just handed him the work orders and retreated to his office. By 10 a.m., Gavin's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Board meeting starts in 1 hour. They're calling for my resignation. Thank you for everything. SM. He stared at the message, grease-stained fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could he possibly say that would make a difference? He was nobody, a mechanic who'd stumbled into something far beyond his understanding. Scarlett Martin's world of corporate warfare and billion-dollar stakes might as well have been another planet, but the image of her face kept returning. That moment when Blackwood had reached for her and she'd flinched. Alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of people who should have protected her. At 10:45. Gavin made a decision he knew he'd probably regret. He found Morrison in the office. Explained he needed to leave for a few hours, personal emergency. Morrison studied him with those knowing eyes that had seen too much of the world's complications. This about that CEO woman? Yes, sir. You planning on doing something stupid? Probably. Morrison sighed, the sound of a man who'd made his own share of questionable decisions. Go, but Gavin, be careful. Men like Blackwood don't fight fair, and they've got resources you can't imagine. The Sterling Heights corporate tower looked even more imposing in daylight, its glass facade reflecting the autumn sun like a mirror designed to blind anyone who dared look directly at power. Gavin approached the main entrance in his work clothes, still wearing the Morrison's auto repair shirt with his name stitched on the pocket. Security stopped him immediately. Can I help you? The guard was different from Torres, younger, more aggressive in his posture. I'm here for the Horizon Technologies board meeting. The guard's expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed amusement. Sir, that's a closed executive session. Unless you have an appointment or clearance, I can't let you up. Then get Victoria Nash on the phone. Tell her Gavin Doyle is here. Recognition flickered across the guard's face. He'd obviously seen the news coverage, knew exactly who Gavin was. After a moment's hesitation, he picked up his desk phone, spoke quietly, listened, then hung up with an expression of disbelief. 32nd floor, Ms. Nash will meet you at the elevator. The elevator ride felt like ascending into a different atmosphere, one where the air was thinner and the stakes immeasurably higher. Victoria Nash was waiting when the doors opened, her expression a careful blend of surprise and calculation. Mr. Doyle, I didn't expect to see you here. I changed my mind about making a statement. The board meeting started 20 minutes ago. Blackwood's lawyers have been presenting their evidence since 10:30. Then we're running out of time. Victoria studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was an asset or a liability. Finally, she nodded. Follow me. And Mr. Doyle, be prepared. This room contains some of the most powerful people in the tech industry. They will not be kind. The boardroom was exactly as Gavin had imagined it. A cathedral to corporate power with a table that could seat 30 and windows overlooking the entire city. 15 people sat around that table, Men and women in suits that cost more than Gavin's annual rent. Their expressions ranging from bored to actively hostile. At the head sat Scarlett Martin. Her posture perfect but her face pale, flanked by her own lawyers who looked like they were fighting a losing battle. Across from her, Richard Blackwood lounged in his chair with the satisfaction of a man who knew he'd already won. His legal team spreading documents across the table like evidence at a crime scene. The conversation stopped when Gavin entered. Blackwood's face transformed from satisfaction to fury in an instant. "What is this? Who authorized this man's presence?" "I did," Victoria said calmly. "Mr. Doyle has information relevant to these proceedings. He's a maintenance worker who assaulted me at a private event," Blackwood snapped. "His presence here is completely inappropriate." "I didn't assault anyone," Gavin said quietly. "I stopped you from touching Ms. Martin without her consent." One of the board members, an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses, raised his hand for silence. "Ms. Nash, what exactly is Mr. Doyle's relevance to this financial investigation?" "He's a witness to Mr. Blackwood's behavior and motivations. Given that this entire case hinges on whether Ms. Martin is guilty of embezzlement or whether Mr. Blackwood has manufactured evidence out of revenge, character and motive are absolutely relevant." Blackwood stood, his face reddening. "This is a circus. I will not sit here and be slandered by a nobody who—" "Sit down, Richard," the elderly board member said, his voice carrying unexpected authority. "Or leave. Those are your options." He turned to Gavin. "Mr. Doyle, you have 5 minutes. Make them count." Gavin moved to the center of the room, acutely aware of 15 pairs of eyes evaluating him, judging him, finding him wanting before he'd even spoken. He thought of Sophie, of the promise he'd made to always be there, and wondered if what he was about to do would break that promise. Then he looked at Scarlett, at the exhaustion and defeat in her eyes, and he knew he'd made the right choice. "Consequences be damned. I'm not a lawyer," he began. "I'm not a businessman. I fix cars for a living, and most days that's hard enough. But I know what I saw Friday night, and I know the difference between justice and revenge." He turned to face Blackwood directly. "You didn't come to that gala to present evidence. You came to humiliate Ms. Martin in front of everyone she'd built professional relationships with. You came to destroy her reputation before she could defend herself, to force her into resignation through public shame rather than legal process." "That's your interpretation," Blackwood said coldly. "Based on what exactly? Your extensive legal training?" "Based on the fact that you reached for her, physically, in a room full of witnesses. That's not how innocent men with legitimate grievances behave. That's how predators behave when they think their power makes them untouchable." Gasps rippled around the table. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. "How dare you?" Blackwood hissed. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This woman stole from the company I helped build. The evidence is irrefutable. Then why didn't you go through proper channels?" Gavin pressed. "Why not file reports with the SEC, pursue legal action through the courts? Why ambush her at a charity event unless your goal was humiliation rather than justice? Because she would have had time to cover her tracks, to destroy evidence, or because your evidence wouldn't hold up to actual scrutiny?" Gavin interrupted. "Because fabricated documents work great for public opinion but fall apart under forensic accounting." The room fell silent. Blackwood's lawyer leaned forward. "Mr. Doyle, are you claiming to have expertise in forensic accounting?" "No, but I'm claiming that guilty people don't usually invite public investigations. And from what I understand, Ms. Martin has been requesting a full independent audit since Friday night." Victoria Nash stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Which brings us to why Mr. Doyle's testimony is relevant. After the events of Friday evening, Ms. Martin authorized me to hire Caldwell and Associates, the top forensic accounting firm in the state, to conduct a comprehensive audit of all her financial transactions with Horizon Technologies. She tapped the tablet, and a projection appeared on the wall behind her. They worked through the weekend. What they found is interesting. The projection showed a complex web of transactions, highlighted in various colors. Every document Mr. Blackwood presented can be traced back to a sophisticated forgery operation. Digital signatures were copied from legitimate authorizations. Transaction records were altered to change dates and amounts. Email headers were spoofed to make them appear to originate from Ms. Martin's accounts. Blackwood's face had gone from red to pale. That's impossible. Those documents came from Horizon's own servers. They came from servers you still had access to, Victoria corrected. Despite your termination 6 months ago, your security credentials were never fully revoked. An oversight our IT department is currently rectifying. She advanced to the next slide. But here's where it gets truly interesting. The IP addresses used to create these forgeries trace back to a consulting firm owned by your brother-in-law. The timestamps on the file modifications all fall within a 3-week period last month, long after the transactions they supposedly document. The elderly board member removed his glasses, cleaning them with deliberate care. "Richard, would you care to explain this?" Blackwood's lawyer immediately interjected. "My client will not be making any statements at this time. These allegations are serious and require proper legal review before you realize you're caught," Scarlett said quietly. She stood, and for the first time since Gavin had entered, she looked like the CEO who'd built an empire. "You came after me because I exposed your embezzlement, Richard. Everything you're accusing me of, you actually did. And when the board forced your resignation, you decided to destroy me rather than face the consequences of your own actions. You have no proof," Blackwood spat. "We have all the proof we need," Victoria said. "And we'll be turning it over to federal investigators this afternoon. The question now is whether this board wants to be associated with a man who committed corporate fraud, or whether they'd prefer to stand behind a CEO who has consistently acted with integrity." The room erupted into urgent conversations. Board members leaned toward each other, lawyers huddled with their clients. And through it all, Blackwood sat frozen. The reality of his situation finally breaking through his armor of arrogance, the elderly board member called for order. "I move that we table the discussion of Ms. Martin's resignation and instead launch a formal investigation into Mr. Blackwood's allegations and Ms. Nash's counter-evidence." All in favor? Every hand except Blackwood's went up. Motion carries. "Richard, I strongly suggest you retain criminal counsel. This meeting is adjourned." As the room emptied, Gavin found himself standing awkwardly near the windows, unsure of his role now that the drama had passed. Scarlett approached him, and up close he could see the tears she was fighting to contain. "You came," she said simply. "Seemed like the right thing to do. You keep doing that." "The right thing? Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Before Gavin could answer, she did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took his grease-stained hand in both of hers. The gesture intimate and grateful and entirely unconcerned with the remaining board members who might be watching. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when everyone else was too scared to look." The media frenzy that followed the board meeting made the initial scandal look like a gentle breeze before a hurricane. By Tuesday morning, Richard Blackwood's face was everywhere, not as a respected businessman but as an alleged criminal. Federal investigators had indeed opened a case, and the forensic evidence Victoria Nash's team had compiled was damning enough that even Blackwood's expensive lawyers were quietly suggesting plea negotiations for Scarlett Martin. Vindication came with its own complications. She sat in her corner office on Tuesday evening, the city lights spreading below her like a carpet of stars, and felt the exhaustion finally catching up. For 6 months she'd been waiting for Blackwood's revenge, knowing it would come, but not knowing what form it would take. The relief of survival mixed with the anger of having had to fight it all. Her phone buzzed with another congratulatory message. This one from a board member who'd been conspicuously silent during the crisis. She ignored it. Instead, she found herself thinking about Gavin Doyle, about the mechanic who'd walked into that boardroom wearing his work shirt and defended her with nothing but honesty and courage. Victoria had provided his background, the military service and the struggles that followed, the daughter he was raising alone, the quiet life he'd been living before stumbling into Scarlett's war. She'd destroyed that quiet life. The media attention that had briefly focused on him during the scandal had exploded after the board meeting. "Working class hero saves CEO," the headline screamed. His face was everywhere, his privacy shattered. And all because he'd made the mistake of doing the right thing. Scarlett had built her career on calculated decisions, on measuring risks and rewards, on protecting her interests above all else. But Gavin Doyle had protected her without calculation, without thought for what it might cost him. The contrast made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Her assistant knocked softly. "Ms. Martin, your 8 o'clock is here. Send him in." Gavin entered looking even more out of place than he had in the boardroom, his discomfort with the luxury obvious in every careful step. He'd cleaned up, traded the work shirt for a button-down that didn't quite fit right. But his hands still bore the permanent stains of his trade. "Mr. Doyle, thank you for coming. You said it was important." Scarlett gestured to the sitting area by the windows, deliberately choosing the informal chairs rather than her desk. "Can I offer you something? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, Ms. Martin, if this is about thanking me again." "If this is about thanking me again." "It's about compensating you," she interrupted. "You lost work because of me. You've been harassed by media because of me. Your privacy has been invaded because I pulled you into my problems. That deserves more than thanks." She slid an envelope across the table. Gavin didn't touch it. "What is this?" "A check. Enough to cover 6 months of your expenses, plus compensation for the catering job you lost, and a bonus for, well, everything else." Gavin looked at the envelope like it might bite him. "I don't want your money. It's not charity, it's compensation for damages. You suffered real harm because you helped me. Let me make that right." "No." The flat refusal surprised her. People didn't usually turn down her money, especially people who clearly needed it. "Mr. Doyle, I didn't help you for money. Taking it now would change what that meant. Would make it transactional instead of, I don't know, human." Scarlett leaned back, studying him. "Most people would take the money. I'm not most people." "No," she agreed quietly. "You're not." They sat in silence for a moment, the city humming below them. Finally, Scarlett spoke again, her voice softer. "Can I tell you something? About why Blackwood hated me so much? You don't owe me your story. Maybe not. But I want to tell it anyway." She stood, moving to the windows, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I came to Horizon 8 years ago as a junior analyst. Nobody special, just another ambitious graduate with more determination than connections. Blackwood was cool then, untouchable, brilliant, and absolutely convinced of his own superiority." She paused, the memory clearly painful. "He noticed me. At first I thought it was professional interest, that he saw potential. He mentored me, promoted me faster than normal, gave me opportunities other analysts would have killed for. I was grateful, worked twice as hard to prove I deserved it." Gavin remained silent, sensing where this was going. Then came the night he invited me to a business dinner. Private, just the two of us to discuss a promotion. Except it wasn't about business. Her voice hardened. He made it very clear what he expected in exchange for continued advancement. When I refused, when I made it clear I'd earned my position, through work not through whatever he thought I owed him, he was furious. "Did you report him?" "To who?" He was the coup. He had relationships with every board member, controlled half the executive suite. I was nobody, and he made sure I knew it. He started undermining my projects, questioning my decisions, making my professional life hell in ways that were subtle enough to seem like legitimate criticism. She turned from the window, meeting Gavin's eyes. So I documented everything. Every inappropriate comment, every decision he made that prioritized his interests over the company's, every financial irregularity I could find. It took me 3 years to build a case strong enough that the board couldn't ignore it. When I finally presented it, they forced his resignation but paid him a fortune to leave quietly, to avoid scandal. And he's been planning revenge ever since. Yes, I knew it was coming, but I thought I'd prepared enough. Built enough alliances, secured my position sufficiently. Turns out power isn't as secure as we like to believe. Gavin was quiet for a long moment. You fought him for 3 years, alone. I couldn't risk involving anyone else. He'd have destroyed them too. That's what I don't understand, Gavin said. You're strong enough to fight a 3-year war by yourself, but you needed me, some random mechanic, to stop him from touching you. Scarlett's eyes glistened. Physical courage and emotional courage are different things. Mr. Doyle, I can face down boardrooms and lawyers and financial battles all day. But when he reached for me, when he invaded my space with that entitled violence, I froze. All my strength, all my preparation, and I just froze. Her voice broke on the last word. She turned back to the window, composing herself. My father was like Blackwood, she continued quietly. Powerful, charismatic, absolutely certain that his position gave him rights over everyone in his orbit. He ruled our home like a corporation, my mother and I just assets to be managed. When I was 16, I watched him destroy her spirit so completely that she stopped being a person and became just an extension of his will. Gavin stood, moving closer but respecting her space. What happened to her? She died when I was 20. Heart attack officially. But I think she just gave up. Stopped fighting a battle she could never win. Scarlett's reflection in the glass showed tears now flowing freely. I swore I'd never be like her. I'd never let a man have that kind of power over me. So I built armor, became successful enough that no one could touch me. But Blackwood found the cracks. He found the cracks. And Friday night, when he reached for me, I wasn't a CEO anymore. I was 16 again, frozen, unable to fight back against a man who believed he owned me. She finally turned to face Gavin fully. Then you stepped between us. The stranger who had no reason to care, no stake in my survival, just stepped between us like it was the most natural thing in the world. Do you have any idea what that meant? Gavin shifted uncomfortably. I just did what anyone should have done. But no one else did. A room full of powerful people, and you were the only one who moved. The only one who saw me as a person worth protecting rather than a corporate entity worth calculating risks over. She reached for the envelope she'd offered earlier. But instead of pushing it toward him again, she held it. This isn't about money, is it? You won't take it because that would reduce what you did to a transaction. You need it to mean something more. Don't we all need that? Gavin asked quietly. For our actions to mean something beyond survival or profit? Scarlett smiled through her tears. You're wiser than you pretend to be, Mr. Doyle. I'm really not. I have a daughter, Sophie. She's 8. And every decision I make, I think about what kind of man I'm showing her. What kind of world I'm teaching her to expect. If I'd walked away from you, if I'd let Blackwood intimidate you without consequence, what would that have taught her about standing up for what's right? She's lucky to have you. She deserves better than me. Better than a father who can barely keep the lights on. Who works 2 jobs and still can't afford the school supplies she needs without help. But she has a father who teaches her that character matters more than comfort. That's worth more than you realize. They stood in the fading light. 2 people from impossibly different worlds, connected by a moment of crisis that had revealed something essential about both of them. Finally, Scarlett spoke again. If you won't take my money, will you at least let me help in other ways? Sophie's education, opportunities you might not have access to otherwise? That's still charity. No, it's investment. In someone who proved they're worth investing in. She paused. And maybe selfishly, I need to know that some good came from this nightmare. That you didn't suffer for nothing. Gavin considered this, the stubborn pride warring with practical reality. Can I think about it? Of course. She walked him to the door, then stopped him with a hand on his arm. Gavin, can I ask you something personal? He nodded. Double quotes. Do the nightmares ever stop? The ones from whatever you saw, whatever made you understand predatory behavior so instinctively. His jaw tightened. No, you just learn to function around them. That's what I thought. She released his arm. Thank you for being honest. Everyone else tells me time heals everything. It's nice to hear the truth from someone who knows better. After Gavin left, Scarlett returned to her window, watching his figure emerge from the building far below and disappear into the evening crowd. She thought about her father, about Blackwood, about all the men who'd tried to make her small. And she thought about the one man who'd made her feel protected, without making her feel weak. 3 days after their conversation in her office, Scarlett found herself doing something completely out of character. She was sitting in her car outside Morrison's auto repair, watching through the grimy windows as Gavin worked on an engine. His movements efficient and practiced. She'd told herself she was just checking on him, making sure the media attention hadn't caused him problems at work. But that was a lie, and Scarlett had built her career on recognizing lies, even her own. The truth was simpler and more complicated. She wanted to see him again. Needed to, in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude or guilt. Finally, she got out of the car and entered the shop. The smell of motor oil and metal hit her immediately, so different from the sanitized air of corporate offices. Morrison looked up from his desk, recognition flickering across his weathered face. You're the CEO from the news. Scarlett Martin. I'm looking for Gavin. Morrison studied her with those eyes that had seen too much. He know you're coming? No. Probably should have called first. Man values his privacy. I know. But I thought, sometimes it's easier to talk without the formality of arranged meetings. Morrison grunted, something that might have been approval. He's in Bay 3. Don't distract him too much. That transmission's tricky. Gavin was indeed focused on a transmission, his hands deep in machinery, muttering something under his breath that sounded like creative profanity. He didn't notice her approach until she spoke. I hope I'm not interrupting. He straightened so quickly he nearly hit his head on the hood. Ms. Martin, what are you? Is something wrong? No. Well, yes, but not the way you mean. She glanced around the shop, suddenly aware of how absurd she looked in her tailored suit among the grease and grime. Can we talk? Somewhere private? They ended up in Morrison's small office after the old man graciously made himself scarce. Scarlett perched on the edge of a worn chair while Gavin leaned against the desk, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable. I need to apologize, Scarlett began. For what? For not asking sooner how you're doing. How's Sophie's doing? The media attention must have been overwhelming. Gavin shrugged. It's dying down. Morrison's been good about keeping reporters away from the shop. Sophie's school has been understanding. We're managing. That's not the same as being okay. No, he admitted. But okay is relative. We're safe, fed, housed. That's more than some people have. Scarlett studied him, this man who seemed incapable of complaining despite having every right to. You set a very low bar for okay. You learn to when you've seen how bad things can actually get. She wanted to press, to understand what he'd seen that gave him such perspective. But something in his expression warned her off. Instead, she changed direction. Victoria told me you've been getting job offers. Companies wanting to hire you for security consulting, media wanting you for interviews, even a book deal offer. Turned them all down. Why? Because they want the story, not me. They want the veteran who stood up to the billionaire, the feel-good narrative they can package and sell. Nobody actually cares about Gavin Doyle the person. They care about Gavin Doyle the symbol. The bitterness in his voice surprised her. Is that what you think I'm doing? Using you as a symbol? He met her eyes directly. I think you're a good person caught in a bad situation. But I also think you're not used to people who don't want something from you. And you don't know what to do with me because I'm not playing by the rules of your world. The assessment stung because it was accurate. You're right. I don't know what to do with you. You've helped me more than I can repay, but you won't let me repay you. You've become part of my story, but you don't want to be part of my story. So where does that leave us? I don't know, Gavin admitted. I never planned any of this. I just acted on instinct, and now everything's complicated in ways I don't understand. Scarlett stood, moving closer to him. Can I ask you something honest? And will you answer honestly? He nodded warily. When you look at me, what do you see? The CEO, the victim you saved, or something else? Gavin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. I see someone who's tired of being strong. Who's built walls so high she's trapped herself inside them. Who wants connection but doesn't know how to ask for it without making it transactional. The words hit like a physical blow. Scarlett felt her carefully maintained composure crack. That's uncomfortably accurate. You asked for honest. I did. She took a shaky breath. Here's my honest answer. When I look at you, I see someone who reminds me that there's a world outside corporate warfare. That there are people who make choices based on character instead of calculation. And it scares me because I don't know how to exist in that world anymore. I've spent so long being the CEO that I've forgotten how to just be Scarlett. Gavin's expression softened. Then maybe stop being the CEO for a while. Not forever, just sometimes. I don't know how. Sure you do. You're doing it right now. No assistants, no lawyers, no boardroom. Just you, talking to someone who has no stake in your corporate success. She laughed, a sound edged with tears. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple. They stood in the small office, the sounds of the shop filtering through the door, and something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two damaged people finding unexpected understanding in the least likely of places. Gavin, Scarlett said quietly, would you and Sophie like to have dinner? Nothing formal, just dinner. As friends. He hesitated, and she could see the war in his eyes, pride versus practicality, protection versus connection. Sophie would love that, he finally said. She's been asking about the lady from the news. Wants to know if you're okay. Your daughter worries about me? She worries about everyone. It's her superpower and her curse. Scarlett smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. Then we should definitely have dinner. Can't leave your daughter worried. They made arrangements, awkward and tentative, like teenagers planning a first date rather than adults coordinating a meal. As Scarlett prepared to leave, Gavin walked her to her car. Ms. Martin, Scarlett, please, at least when it's just us. Scarlett, he corrected. This dinner, I'm not trying to, I know. You're not after anything. That's why I asked. She drove away feeling lighter than she had in months. Glancing in the rearview mirror to see Gavin still standing in the parking lot. Looking as confused as she felt about whatever was developing between them. Dinner was supposed to be at a casual restaurant, somewhere neutral and comfortable. But when Scarlett arrived at the address Gavin had texted, she found herself in front of a modest apartment building in Brookfield. The kind of neighborhood her GPS had warned her about twice during the drive. She climbed the stairs to the third floor, her designer heels clicking against worn linoleum, and knocked on apartment 3C, The door opened to reveal not Gavin, but a small girl with dark curls and eyes that seemed far too knowing for someone so young. "You're prettier in person," Sophie announced. "Daddy said you were pretty, but I thought maybe he was just being nice because you're rich." "Sophie," Gavin's voice came from inside, embarrassed. "We talked about this. You said to be honest." Sophie stepped aside to let Scarlett enter. "I'm being honest. She is pretty. And her shoes are really tall. Do your feet hurt?" Scarlett found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "Sometimes. But they make me feel powerful. Daddy says real power comes from the inside, not from clothes or shoes or money. Your daddy is very wise." Sophie considered this seriously. "He is, but he's also sad sometimes. He thinks I don't notice, but I do." "Are you sad too?" The question, asked with such innocent directness, caught Scarlett off guard. Before she could answer, Gavin appeared from the small kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Sophie, give Miss Martin some space." "Sorry, she's very direct." "It's refreshing," Scarlett said honestly. "Most people tell me what they think I want to hear." The apartment was tiny but immaculate, everything in its place despite the obvious poverty. A small table was set with mismatched plates, and something that smelled wonderful was cooking in the kitchen. Sophie grabbed Scarlett's hand, pulling her toward a corner where a broken piano sat. "Daddy's fixing this for me. It was my grandma's before she got sick." "Do you play piano?" "I used to. A long time ago. Will you play something, please? The middle keys still work." Scarlett glanced at Gavin, who shrugged apologetically. She sat at the battered bench, her fingers finding keys that stuck and others that didn't sound at all. But she played anyway, a simple melody from her youth. Before corporate battles and betrayals, when music had been joy rather than performance, Sophie listened with rapt attention, then climbed onto the bench beside her. "Teach me." And somehow, in that cramped apartment with a broken piano and a trusting young girl, Scarlett felt something inside her unlock. This was what she'd lost in her climb to the top. This simple human connection, untainted by agenda or calculation. The peace lasted exactly 4 days. Gavin was closing the shop on Friday evening when Morrison called him into the office, his expression grim. "We got a problem. Building inspector came by today. Found a dozen code violations. Things that have been fine for 30 years suddenly need immediate attention. Says we've got 2 weeks to fix everything, or he shuts us down." "That's impossible. The repairs alone would cost $50,000 minimum, which I don't have." Morrison's hands shook slightly as he lit a cigarette, despite the no smoking sign on his own wall. "Someone's putting pressure on the inspector. Someone with enough juice to make my little shop a priority when there's real problems all over this city." Gavin felt ice in his stomach. "Blackwood. That'd be my guess. You embarrassed him, cost him his reputation. Men like that don't forget." That night, Gavin lay awake on his couch, calculating impossibilities. If Morrison closed, he'd lose his only stable income. The catering work was gone. The media attention had died down, meaning no more offers. And finding another mechanic job that would tolerate his occasional bad days would take weeks he didn't have. The text came at 2 a.m. "I know what Blackwood's doing to Morrison's shop. Let me help." Scarlett, he should have ignored it. Should have handled this himself, maintained his pride, kept their developing friendship separate from his financial disasters. But desperation makes different calculations than pride. The next morning, he called her. "How did you know?" "Victoria has people watching Blackwood's associates. The building inspector is his brother-in-law's former college roommate." Not exactly subtle. Scarlett's voice was crisp, businesslike. "I can have lawyers on this by Monday, make the violations disappear. That's not fixing the problem. That's using power to avoid consequences. Same thing Blackwood does. So what do you suggest? Let Morrison lose his business? Let yourself lose your job?" "Gavin, Sometimes you have to fight power with power. Sometimes you have to fight power with power. And sometimes fighting that way makes you become what you're fighting against. Silence on the line. Then, softer, what if it's not charity? What if Morrison's shop becomes a contractor for Horizon Technologies fleet maintenance? Legitimate business, legitimate income, and Blackwood can't touch him without it looking like corporate retaliation. Gavin closed his eyes. It was still her money, her power, her world saving his. But it was also survival, and he had Sophie to think about. I need to talk to Morrison. Of course. But Gavin? Let someone help you. You've spent so long being the one who protects everyone else. Let someone protect you for once. The contract signing happened at Horizon Technologies, but Scarlett insisted on Morrison's shop for the announcement. 2 weeks later, reporters crowded into the garage that had been painted, reorganized, and officially certified as a Horizon Fleet Maintenance Facility. Morrison stood beside Scarlett, looking uncomfortable in a suit, while Gavin hung back near the tool benches, trying to remain invisible. But Sophie had other plans. She'd insisted on coming, wearing her best dress, the one saved for special occasions. When Scarlett stepped to the microphone, Sophie was right beside her. Today represents a new partnership, Scarlett began, her CEO voice firm and confident. But more than that, it represents a commitment to supporting the people who supported me when I needed it most. She gestured to Gavin. This man risked his livelihood to do what was right. The least I can do is ensure that right action doesn't come with devastating consequences. Morrison's Auto Repair will now service Horizon's entire corporate fleet, providing quality work and stable employment. Applause filled the garage. But then Sophie tugged on Scarlett's sleeve, whispering something. Scarlett smiled and handed the girl the microphone. My daddy says that good people help each other, Sophie announced, her young voice carrying clearly. He helped Miss Martin when she was scared. Now she's helping us. That's how the world is supposed to work. Everyone taking care of everyone. The reporters loved it. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment of a young girl's simple wisdom cutting through corporate complexity. But Gavin saw something else. He saw Scarlett's eyes glistening, saw the way she looked at Sophie with something like wonder, as if the girl had articulated something she'd been trying to understand. After the reporters left, after Morrison had shaken hands until his arm was sore, after the shop had returned to its comfortable mechanical chaos, Scarlett found Gavin in the back bay. Your daughter is remarkable. She's been through a lot. Learned to find good in difficult situations. She learned that from you. Gavin shook his head. I just try not to make things worse. Scarlett moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, expensive and subtle. Gavin, can I ask you something? What are we doing here? I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. This partnership, these dinners, the way we keep finding reasons to see each other. What is this? He met her eyes, seeing the vulnerability behind her corporate armor. I think it's two people who are tired of being alone, who found each other in the worst possible circumstances and discovered something unexpected. And what happens now? Now we stop pretending this is just business or gratitude. We admit that something's changing, and we figure out if we're brave enough to let it. Scarlett's breath caught. Around them, the shop hummed with ordinary life, mechanics working, tools clanging, the radio playing classic rock. And in that ordinary moment, something extraordinary happened. She took his hand, grease stains and all, and held it without hesitation or calculation. Just held it. Two people bridging the impossible distance between their worlds with the simple human need for connection. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too, he replied. But maybe that means it's real. 6 months later, the world looked different to both of them. Scarlett stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, but the view had changed. Not the city itself, that remained the same sprawling landscape of glass and ambition, but what she saw when she looked at it. Where once she'd seen territories to conquer and competitors to outmaneuver, she now saw neighborhoods where people like Gavin struggled to survive, where single parents worked multiple jobs, where the gap between her tower and their reality stretched like an unbridgeable canyon dot, except it wasn't unbridgeable. She'd learned that much. The Legacy Initiative, as the board had named it over her objections about the grandiose title, had started small. Partnerships with local businesses like Morrison's, providing stable contracts and fair wages. Scholarship programs for the families of veterans. Childcare subsidies for single parents working in Horizon's supply chain. Small things that made enormous differences in individual lives. Victoria entered without knocking, something Scarlett had finally learned to accept. The quarterly report is ready. The board is going to love these numbers. Employee retention up 42%, productivity metrics exceeding projections. And the PR value alone has added an estimated $200 million to our market valuation. That's not why we did it, Scarlett said quietly. I know. But it doesn't hurt that doing good also happens to be good business. Victoria paused. He's downstairs, by the way. With Sophie. They're early. Scarlett checked her watch. The gala started in 2 hours, plenty of time for the surprise she'd planned. Send them up. The elevator doors opened to reveal Gavin in a suit that actually fit. Custom-tailored because Scarlett had insisted and he'd finally stopped fighting her on practical matters. Sophie wore a deep blue dress that matched her eyes, her dark curls tamed into something resembling elegance. But it was the shopping bag Gavin carried that caught Scarlett's attention. We brought you something, Sophie announced, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. Daddy said it was too much, but I told him you'd love it. From the bag, Gavin pulled a small wooden box, handmade and polished to a warm shine. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a simple silver bracelet engraved with 5 words. Try touching her and see. Scarlett's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing immediately to her eyes. Sophie's idea, Gavin said, his voice rough with emotion. She said you needed something to remind you that you're not alone anymore. That someone will always stand between you and the people who try to hurt you. We're a team now, Sophie added seriously. That's what families do. They protect each other. The word family hung in the air, enormous and terrifying and absolutely right. Over the past 6 months, through dinners and day trips and quiet evenings in Gavin's apartment, through Sophie's piano lessons at Scarlett's penthouse where she'd had the broken instrument professionally restored, through midnight phone calls when Gavin's nightmares were bad and afternoon texts when Scarlett's board meetings were worse. They had become something that looked remarkably like a family, not the family Scarlett had grown up in, ruled by fear and control. Not even the family Gavin had tried to build with Amanda before she'd fled from his damage. But something new, built on honesty and mutual protection, and the radical idea that strength could come from vulnerability, rather than armor. Scarlett fastened the bracelet around her wrist, the silver cool against her skin. It's perfect. You're both perfect. We're not perfect, Gavin corrected gently. We're just real. That's better. The gala that evening was everything Scarlett's events usually were. Elegant and expensive and filled with people whose net worth could solve poverty in entire nations if they chose to. But this year felt different. This year, she'd insisted on a different guest list. Mixed among the executives and investors were mechanics from Morrison's shop, veterans from the support programs Horizon now funded, single parents whose lives had been changed by the childcare initiatives. And at the table of honor, wearing his properly fitted suit with only slight discomfort, sat Gavin Doyle with Sophie beside him, her eyes wide at the chandeliers and flowers and abundance. When Scarlett took the stage to speak, she didn't read from prepared remarks. Instead, she spoke from a place she'd spent years trying to bury. 6 months ago, I stood in a room very much like this one and faced the destruction of everything I'd built. One man, armed with lies and power, nearly succeeded in erasing me. He would have, if not for someone who had no reason to help me, no stake in my survival, nothing to gain from my success. She found Gavin in the crowd, held his gaze. Gavin Doyle stepped between me and someone who believed his wealth made him untouchable. 5 words, "Try touching her and see," changed everything. Not just for me, but for what this company stands for. Scarlett touched the bracelet on her wrist. I've learned something these past months. Real power isn't about controlling others or building walls so high nobody can reach you. Real power is about connection, about using whatever advantages you have to lift others up, about choosing vulnerability over invincibility. She gestured to the mixed crowd. Everyone in this room tonight represents that choice. The choice to see each other as human beings rather than assets or obstacles. The choice to measure success not just in quarterly earnings, but in lives changed for the better. The applause was polite, but slightly confused. This wasn't the usual corporate speech. But Scarlett didn't care about the confusion. She cared about the single tear running down Sophie's cheek. About the way Gavin's hands had stopped fidgeting with his napkin. About the veterans in the back who suddenly sat straighter. Seen and acknowledged. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Scarlett found herself on the balcony overlooking the city. Gavin joined her, Sophie having fallen asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms, like the young person she still was despite her old soul. "You're going to get pushback," Gavin said quietly. "Some of those investors looked like they'd swallowed glass during your speech. Let them be uncomfortable. Comfort is overrated." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. 6 months ago, you were the ice queen of corporate America. Now you're quoting platitudes about comfort being overrated. What happened to you? I met someone who showed me there was more to life than winning. Someone who protected me when I needed it and challenged me when I needed that more. She turned to face him fully. Someone who made me want to be better, not more successful, just better. Gavin's expression softened. "Scarlett, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago, but I was scared. You're never scared. I'm always scared. I just hide it better than most." He took her hand, the gesture now familiar and comfortable. "I'm falling in love with you. Have been for months. And it terrifies me because I don't know how to be what you need. Don't know if I can exist in your world without losing myself." "Then don't exist in my world," Scarlett said, her voice trembling. "Build a new one with me. Something that's not corporate towers or struggling apartments, but something in between. Something real. And Sophie? She's part of this, part of me. I can't. Sophie is the best part. Don't you understand?" She showed me what I'd lost in my climb to the top. Honesty, wonder, the ability to see good in people instead of calculating their usefulness. "I don't want you without her. I want both of you, completely, complications and all." Gavin pulled her close. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, they felt something they'd both thought was impossible. Safety. Not the safety of walls and armor, but the safety of being truly seen and loved anyway, inside. Sophie stirred, lifting her head and spotting them on the balcony. She padded out, still half asleep, and wedged herself between them without ceremony. "Are you two done being mushy? I'm tired and want to go home." "Which home?" Gavin asked, the question carrying weight neither adult could ignore. Sophie looked between them with those two knowing eyes. "The one we make together, obviously. That's how families work." Scarlett laughed, the sound free and genuine. "Obviously. How could I have missed that?" As they gathered their things to leave, as Sophie chattered about the flowers and the food and whether they could come back next year, as Gavin's hand found Scarlett's and held it with the certainty of someone who'd finally stopped running from connection, the city spread below them like a promise, not a promise of perfection or easy answers, but a promise that sometimes, in the midst of corporate warfare and personal battles, two damaged people could find each other and build something worth protecting. Something worth the risk of vulnerability. Something that looked, against all odds, like home. The bracelet caught the light as they walked to the elevator. Try touching her and see. Not a threat anymore, but a declaration. A reminder that they'd chosen each other. Chosen to stand together against whatever came next. And whatever came next, they'd face it as they'd faced everything since that first impossible moment. With honesty, courage, and the radical belief that doing the right thing, even when it cost everything, was always worth it in the end. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.